Hi, I'm Benjamin Payne. At the K-12 Education Office at Hillsdale College, we support school founding groups and their efforts to start classical schools across the country. Finding the right leader is one of the first and most important steps to building a successful school. While we do consider experience in education, we seek candidates who exhibit unwavering personal integrity, honesty, courage, and servant-hearted leadership. Perhaps that's you. If you're looking to engage in fulfilling, impactful, and challenging work protecting our nation's future and building up the next generation of virtuous citizens, we'd love to hear from you. I'm looking for strong school leaders right now. Learn more about how you can make a difference at hillsdale.edu/leader. hillsdale.edu/LEADER. That's hillsdale.edu/leader.
Welcome to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, bringing you insight into classical education and its unique emphasis on human virtue and moral character, responsible citizenship, content-rich curricula, and teacher-led classrooms. Now your host, Scot Bertram.
Thanks for listening. The Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast is part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you get your audio. You also can find more information on topics and ideas discussed on this show at our website, k12.hillsdale.edu. Thanks for listening. We're joined by Stephen Battaglia. He is Assistant Headmaster for Upper School at Seven Oaks Classical School in Ellettsville, Indiana. Stephen, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Scott, for having me on. I really enjoy coming on here and talking with you.
And you can find more about Seven Oaks at sevenoaksclassical.org. Stephen joins us today to talk about inspiring teachers to inspire students. Why should school leaders like yourself as an assistant headmaster prioritize inspiring teachers?
It's good. Yeah. You wonder when you think about school leadership, particularly heads of school, there's so much on the priority list. You name it, right? Your board relations, your hiring teachers, your facilities, your curriculum invitation budgets, and all these different things, you name it, and head of schools are added. And so the question really is, you're right, why prioritize particular inspiring teachers, right? It could almost fall to the wayside. I think part of it is dealing with this idea that, kind of avoiding the alternatives, right? In the sense of, right, if you don't have inspirational teachers, in the absence of that, it's really difficult to deliver the curriculum. The Hillsdale K-12 office works very diligently in putting together a curriculum in such a way that is one that is life-giving. And without an inspirational teacher, it can be really hard, really difficult to bring it to life. I think also as well, you have instances where if you don't have inspirational teachers, if you're not prioritizing it, you really begin to set a cultural standard for your school as a head of school that really sets you up in maybe a negative way, or presents a sort of, as I would call it, the germ effect, where you have this sort of tendency to kind of like pass along maybe some animosity or something like that kind of can kind of creep in if that occurs. And then I think as well, in the absence of if you don't prioritize it and it's not really on the slate for a head of school, you kind of leave it up to chance, and then it kind of just makes its own way. And you as a head of school really are responsible for the sort of cultural expectations that you're setting. So it really can be something that you think is not a significant deal, but it really should be considered by heads of school.
So what makes a teacher inspirational? Where are we trying to point our teachers toward?
Yes, it's an interesting thing, because you almost have to think in some ways on the front end. And I would say, I think part of what draws teachers into being inspirational is what kind of makes them come to education to begin with. And the sort of thing, you only discover this as a head of school if in the hiring process. And it really is going to be about identifying teachers who have a sort of a strength of will, who have an interest in the curriculum, who are interested in learning outside of what they knew to be their sort of quote unquote subject expertise. I think it also involves collegiality. Are you able to identify particular teachers, individuals who can really get along well with others? And I think what makes into being an inspiring teacher as well is their humility, their ability to be coached. I think those sort of things play into the fact of they're able to lead particular students in a way that, really draws from the goodwill of the curriculum in inspiring ways.
How do you know when you have a teacher inside your school who has been inspirational and who has inspired your students?
Yeah, it would be nice, right? If you had everything like a magic ball, right? And you can just identify,
Maybe
right? Show you the way.
Maybe a bell would ring.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I think honestly, it's, one of the things that head of schools are responsible for is kind of being, not just in this high office away from their teachers, but kind of be boots on the ground, right? To kind of be involved in their school community, not just in classrooms, but in enough way, right, in a measured way to be surrounded by their faculty. And so I think one way is, a good litmus test is being involved in the classroom, of seeing, what's going on and observing teachers in a way, not to kind of be involved in a way to kind of have you gotcha moment, like I'm being there, I'm watching you, but to enjoy, to sit in and to experience class as if you were a student. I think as well as, one way is just kind of getting a sense, putting your finger on the sort of pulse of the community of teachers that you have built. Are you getting a sense from your teachers that things are working well together? Do you get a sense that teachers are have a good rapport with one another, enjoy doing the good work that they're doing, enjoy fulfilling the mission of the school? I think those really play into it. And I think as well, I think head of school has got to be discerning on this one, but just get a sense from the community at large, the parent community. What's the sort of, sense about, what are particular, general anticipations of the school? Is there excitement surrounding the school? Are parents, ones that are asking questions, these sort of things? I think those really, each one is a varying degree, right, of how a school should balance it, but each one can be sort of signs to or windows into what that looks like at your particular school.
What resources are at the school teacher's disposal to help them in their efforts to inspire students? And then maybe from your end too, what resources are at the school leader's disposal to also inspire those teachers?
Yes, I think, right, obviously we're here with as a Hillsdale and the K-12 office does so much work to be thinking about, what kind of resources, whether it be videos to watch or guidance documents to read over, in terms of what it looks like for heads of schools or even teachers to be thinking about, how do I teach this particular subject, a little bit more in a way that, is inviting to students, or, what is some good practical advice to deal with a particular teacher that really would bump this teacher up in terms of, just their sort of disposition that may lead to them being more inspirational. I think as well, I think it also involves being storytellers. Classical education is such that the movement is one in which it's allowing us to be storytellers. It's such an integral part, a keystone, if you will, of classical education, is this revitalization of being storytellers. And I think that's important for teachers to recognize that, yes, you have objectives to accomplish. Yes, you have evaluations to make, assessments of your students. But don't forget the enjoyable parts of being storytellers, of being able to incorporate a lively story in a way that I think captures students' imaginations. And then for school leaders, I think the same is true for them. I think resources for them are being able to find stories that really hone into the work of education or the work of, or what it means to be human, ones that capture really teachers' imagination. So for example, we've at my particular school at Seven Oaks, we've done short stories. We've gathered teachers around particular short stories this year, and one that we're reading through, ones that we've read through, things like Hawthorne, that really have asked the sort of questions that have engaged faculty in an interesting way that, I think, you don't have to like poll them at the end to say, okay, who felt inspired after this reading this particular story, right? That'd be silly. But you could see it on their faces, and you could see it in lunchtime after it, them continuing the conversation. So I think those are really good resources to keep faculty, teachers and heads of school especially thinking about inspiring.
Talking with Stephen Battaglia. He is Seven Oaks Classical School's assistant headmaster for upper school on inspiring teachers to inspire students. The work is hard to get them to that point. And then the school year ends and begins and ends and begins. And I feel there could be an inclination at times to lose that inspiration as each year begins and ends. How do you work to keep that teacher inspired year in and year out?
That's so good. And I think that is, that's really like you're putting your finger on, Scott, the sort of trick of the hard thing, right? It's easy when you're in the moment. It's sort of like, same question could be asked of like, how do you like win the Super Bowl or the championship and then get excited for the next season, something like that. And I think it is, one way in a practical way for head of schools to be thinking about is just to be curious with your teachers of whether it's assigning it through you yourself as the head of school or department chairs or some other matter, but assigning some kind of reading or some kind of assignment in such a way. And that's not onerous, but one in which that keeps teachers involved. I think another way is just building excitement for the year. I think teachers really find excitement or inspiration even through heads of school that are really caught the vision of the school, are really determined, continue to think about the mission, and then really reveal that to teachers in such a way that they see that growth is happening and they're seeking their greater good. And so I think when you come back in August, if you're a teacher and you're seeing that your head of school has put together measures to build excitement, whether it be, renovations of the building, or whether it be, hey, let's look at this particular text this year, or here's what I'd like to charge you with, motivate you with considering this year. I think that really resonates with a lot of teachers. And it sees their work beyond just the sort of mundane work of education, but actually sees that they're tied to the mission and this is worthy of their time. And it, kind of referencing those sort of things that you set the year up with, especially like you're getting at from the summer where a lot of that can be extinguished or diminished. I think kind of building that excitement in terms of the sort of programming or the things that are happening in the life of the school, being open and honest and sharing that with, as a head of school, your faculty, I think that goes a long way.
If you work hard and can build this team, this culture of inspired teachers at an institution, what kind of effect does that have on staff members, students, the whole school community when they see the inspired teachers working inside a place like Seven Oaks?
I think it just makes it fun, honestly. I think it makes it more exciting to be part of something, that, like any sports team you may be part of or any sort of organization that you're joined in, it makes it exciting. You see the sort of thing, the work that you're doing has value, and it gathers people around a common cause. I mean, if you think about it like a city, like a school, like a city community, a civic community, you see everyone kind of more carefully pulling together, serving one another in such a way. And I think that is really the testament. When you see others serving and loving one another in ways that you haven't before, that a testament that the way that you've inspired as a head of school, your teachers in your community is really catching on. I think it's, I think it is true that it's possible to have a bad school with inspired teachers, but I think it's the same as the opposite is true. It's impossible to have a good school without inspiring teachers. And so I think that's like one of the, or maybe overlooked, but a key ingredient to having an excellent school is this sort of sense that your teachers are inspired, excuse me, and that you're seeing that through the sort of way in which they approach their work. I think that's a really strong testament.
The topic, inspiring teachers to inspire students. And so I thought back a little bit to those teachers who perhaps did the most to inspire me along my educational journey. And not across the board, but many of them did things slightly differently. They had a unique perspective or a different way of teaching or working with the students. Is that something in particular that can be a magic trick to inspire students? Is that something that you talk with teachers about to sort of be themselves and to be someone who can inspire students?
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because when I think about this, I think about, you're right. What are the sort of ways in which, what was the sort of thing that, inspired me from, the inspirational teachers? And, you're right. Like, there was never one thing, that one person did that could be true of everyone. But the reality was, at least in my experience, and it sounds like very similar to you, they were, good people who were genuine, who were sincere, and loved the sort of work that they did. And I think that is why I think it's so true when you think about, as a head of school, who you hire is just so important in the sense of really launching this idea of inspiring teachers or having inspiring teachers, because they really are in a position to set the tone in the way, and you really want to be thinking about someone who can teach, who can operate a classroom, who has a disposition that is sincere and genuine, and one in which they feel comfortable in being who they are, and knowing that is good. Now, I will say as well that there is always the sort of one that, the sort of old Flair sort of mentality, where it is you kind of get a wild card sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I think that also works too. I think there's those that, just, may not just be the sort of, measuring stick all the sort of time that measures up to what the expectation is. But there is the one little oddball out that actually I think can be really good for a school culture and a faculty culture that really works well, so far as it's thought through carefully and that sort of thing.
You alluded to this a little bit earlier, but for a school and institution that does not have inspiring teachers, what problems can arise?
Yeah, it's really, I think, one of the aspects of it that really is significant is, my experience being in schools and being in leadership positions is that, if they're not particularly inspired, they that can be contagious, right? And so one thing that you could find, particularly as a problem, is that uninspired teachers, the uninspirational spirit will kind of, I think, really trickle through a faculty, and not always, right? There's always that sort of thing that can combat it, but I think that's a real danger. I think as well, like I said, I think before, is just this idea of, if it's not you directing the course, if you don't have your hands on the reins, so to speak, teachers will look for inspiration in other ways. And right, it could be for good or for bad. What will be true is that you, as the head of school, won't necessarily, you'll be working to kind of pull back the reins if you let off too loose. And that, that presents particularly its own challenges. One thing I think it's helpful to say here, and I think it is considered for heads of schools is to really consider that, I think one kind of measure head of schools may fall into in terms of this idea of inspiring teachers is to think that, one particular solution is that, paying teachers more will necessarily translate into inspiration all of a sudden. In my experience, just that's probably a cautious step to take and not necessarily put all the chips in on that particular aspect. I think there's maybe immediate effect that may happen, but I think as a head of school, it kind of presents you for other challenges.
Stephen, let's end here, which is when you are looking for hiring teachers, looking for teachers to hire, what kind of qualities do you look for that perhaps indicate, even if that teacher is not where they can be, that they can reach a level where they become an inspiring teacher? What qualities do you want to see present?
That's good. I think as a head of school, you want to see a sort of a coachability, a humility. Is the teacher willing to kind of listen to feedback? And I really do think you can get that through an interview process or even just talking to them. I think as well, there's a sort of strength of will, right? Do they have the sort of what it takes to endure the long year of a school year? And the sort of question about, what happens when they have that brief reprieve in the summertime and coming back? How do you keep them going? Mm-hmm. I think that strength of will really matters in that particular aspect. And, are they joyful? Are they versatile? Can they kind of do different things in that particular way? And is there kinesiology? I think as well, when you're thinking about as a school leader or head of school, the hiring of a teacher, I think the proof in the pudding will be really the demo lesson. So having teachers really get in the classroom, get their feet wet, see how they are in that in particular environment. And there, what I would encourage head of schools to be looking for the sort of dynamism things. Are they dynamic within their lesson? Do they have creativity with their lesson, even if it's a little bit outside of what you would maybe do? Do you see the creativity come out? And I think the point that you made is probably the strongest, Scott, and that is the sincerity. Are you getting a real representation, do you think, of the teacher themselves?
Stephen Battaglia is assistant headmaster for upper school at Seven Oaks Classical School in Ellettsville, Indiana. More at sevenoaksclassical.org. And we talked about inspiring teachers to inspire students. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us here on the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast.
Scott, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
I'm Scot Bertram. We invite you to like us on Facebook. Search for Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education. You also can follow us on Instagram at Hillsdale_K-12. That's Hillsdale_K-12 on Instagram. Thank you for listening to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you get your audio.